A10 again, Heat and Kogan here, and we're going to be talking about fire, which is kind of interesting.
For the second time.
And here's the thing, you know, we're filming this in October, and this is the fire that winds up inspiring Fire Prevention Month.
Really?
This is it.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
Learn something new every day.
You know, when I went and took this fire protection program in Suffolk, anytime they were covering these tragedies, I was fascinated because so much of it's in our curriculum. So if you
change the batteries and smoke detectors, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Have a fire drill, because that's what these kids are doing. Except for him, he's just picking his nose. Doesn't know what's going on. But you know, again, when you're talking about like certain safety precautions and things that they teach you today during Fire Prevention Month, a lot of these things were not in place. And then, of course, when we look at the fire that inspires it all, the building construction materials also did not really help out the situation in certain cities.
No, not at all.
So it's from October 7th to the 13th.
Wait, what?
Are we still there?
It's 16th.
Okay.
It's October 16th, by the way.
You know. All right, so when we look at this one, the Chicago Fire of 1871 is really one of the fires that inspires Fire Prevention Month.
I think it's also a TV show now.
It is.
And it's also the name of the MLS soccer team.
There's usually like at least one kid that goes, oh, like the TV show. It's like, well, you know, kind of.
Sometimes history inspires art.
The thing is, the reason why you have a show like Chicago Fire is because, you know, you're talking about a busy city.
Yep.
And of course, as we're going throughout
Dare I say, a windy city?
Oh, nice. Probably contributed to that spread throughout the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at the major cities where, of course, you're looking at TV shows where, like Chicago Fire or even like Rescue Me from like way back, all right?
Great show.
So when you're looking at particular shows like that, you know, the setting for them is cities, and you know there's a lot of action in the cities. There's also sometimes tragedies as well, but this one's pretty interesting. And I start with you got 4 boys.
My kids love these books.
Love them?
Love them.
They're cool. They are cool.
Yes, they are.
The reason why I bring this up is because all of them are like really history based. I've read a couple of them as well, including the Great Chicago Fire. And the thing is that, you know, by the time you get to middle school, you've probably seen quite a few of these. And this author, who's very particular, actually travels to a lot of these places. I know she did for the D-Day one. But what are you going to use to write a book like this? Primary and secondary sources, pretty much, which is pretty interesting. So when we look at this one, when you're looking at how this fire started, this is probably one of the sources that she used. Because I think with this book, the one she did about, did you read the Great Chicago Fire?
I mean, yes.
There's so much going on.
The Magic Treehouse books.
There was a lot of things that she went into with that particular book. You know, big city, urbanization, as we're going to get into in this unit, immigration, and then of course, you know, when you talk about the city populations going up and immigrant population, not a lot of regulations, you throw in this and it really gets kind of out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look here, and you know, a lot of these building materials, interior and exterior, are made of wood, which is going to cause it. So Chicago in Flames, burning of the Crosby Opera House. And you know, again, 1871, you know, when you're looking at certain tragedies today, if something bad has happened, unfortunately people's initial reaction is to go to their cell phone. We don't have the luxury of photos, so you have people recapping it.
And if the Weather Channel were around back then, the weather report for Chicago would have been dry.
Yes.
You know, it hadn't rained in several weeks. This was a tinderbox. It was dry wood ready to explode in a massive fire. Chicago, the windy city, blowing off of Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan itself was like really, really polluted at the time, and I think part of it actually caught on fire from the oil that was floating on top of the water.
Yep.
I mean, it was the perfect storm for a fire to spread.
Wind, high winds, and dry materials are not a perfect combination. I mean, if you go out west to California,
perfect example.
Every spring, you can almost like set your watch to it or your calendar to it. You know, they have these huge wildland fires, and you know, again, when we're looking here. You kind of see, particularly here, I guess you'd say, you know, you have high winds, a lot of fire, and you kind of get an idea of the limitations that they had. You know, this is the day and age where firefighters are using bucket brigades to put out fires.
The fire engines they have are hand pumped to pressurize the water hose.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you know, again, you know, if you're on this top floor with all of this raging through, the ladders are not going to reach you. I mean, this is what we're talking about. right here. This is what's fighting this huge fire. And this winds up going on for days. This is the aftermath of it.
Almost looks like the aftermath of the Civil War.
So I was just gonna,
you know, it looks like the same picture we would show for Reconstruction.
If you showed this picture during Reconstruction, and oh gosh, next time we'll do that. Doesn't look any different.
Yeah.
You know, really war torn. The damage. Now here's always the interesting one. This is, I mean, city blocks after blocks after blocks. I mean, great city.
Yep.
I mean, this is where we're talking. When we're talking about that fire spread, and you're talking about it getting close to Lake Michigan. I mean, who knows if that lake wasn't there, how far?
Yeah.
You know, and this one would have gone.
The heat, melting pewter dishes. It was
everything has like a point where, in terms of material, when it either ignites or when it fails. Like steel, when you get to 1,000 degrees, that steel's exposed to it. It starts to get weak. So this is kind of, if you're talking about steel at 1,000 degrees, and you're looking here, I mean, this thing, it got hot. This was pretty hot. I mean, a heavy fire load is what you would refer to this as.
And the miracle of it all, 300 people.
That's it.
Like
100,000 people homeless.
Yeah, like you're talking a city on fire, and that few of people that actually die from it. That amazing. We don't really know what started it. There is a theory, though.
I love this theory.
Yeah.
Here we go. It was a cow.
Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
The legend states, again, this is not confirmed. We'll probably never know what started it, but legend has it Mrs. O'Leary was out on a cold October night going to milk the cow. She has a little lantern with her. The cow didn't like her cold hands on the udder. Boom!
Understandable.
Kicks Mrs. O'Leary. The lantern falls over into the hay, ignites the hay, and all hay breaks loose.
And
see what I did there?
All hay breaks. The coffee hasn't made its way.
No, it hasn't.
Well, yeah,
I'm so tired.
I know. So, but when you're looking at, well, how could something simple as that happen? When you look at how fire travels, it's going to travel conduction, convection, radiation. So when you're looking at these buildings being close together, you know, of course, you don't necessarily need that flame to actually touch it for it to ignite. Dry conditions, wood, you know, that radiating heat is going to cause it to ignite.
I'm sure most of them, like, put your hand over a fire, you feel that heat. You put a match or a piece of wood over that fire long enough, it'll ignite without actually having to touch the
And you're
flame.
talking about 450 degrees, I think off the top of my head is what's going to get wood to ignite. And of course, that temperature can vary because if you're talking about old material, dry. So here's some other theories: vandals, milk thieves, that's a funny one, spontaneous combustion, some drunk neighbor, and of course the O'Leary cow one.
That's the one I like to go with, just because it's cool.
It's funny.
Yeah.
It's funny. However, when they weren't able to really get much evidence out of it, because when they questioned the cow, this is all you got out of it.
One of my students in the past was like, is that why it's the Chicago Bulls? Because of the cow. And it's actually not, because Chicago was the center of the slaughterhouse industry. When we talked about those, did we talk about the cowboys?
Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes, we did.
You know, those cows were brought to Chicago, where they were then slaughtered.
Because it was the transportation hub at that time.
Longhorns, yeah.
But you know, when you get this, you know, when you look here, they have this landmark where the Chicago fire began in 1871, which is pretty interesting. I think there's a firehouse there to this particular day.
You know, and with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and we're going to see the same effect of the Chicago fire, out of a tragedy comes change. And city engineers, city planners learn a lot about the Chicago fire, and cities that then become built after this date are built in a much different way.
Yeah.
You know, particularly New York City. You know, if you've ever been in New York City, lower Manhattan, the older part of the city, the streets are close together, they're intertwined, and then you start to get up into midtown Manhattan, you know, the numbered streets, you see a much different plan going on. I'm not going to ruin the surprise.
So, like, as a social studies student and as a historian, you know, when you're looking at a tragedy, there's a number of ways to look at it. All right, what happened, affected, you know, the statistics. So, but the other thing, too, is that when you're looking at it, you're like, okay, well, what were they lacking at the time? In terms of technology, building codes, regulations,
building materials,
you know, something as simple as you know, a drought and wind, you know, really causes the city to burn to the ground, and it had a lot to do with the materials. I mean, people learn from tragedies. There's a lot that can be said about this picture, but
yeah, unfortunately, we are a much more reactive society than
yes.
a preventive society.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
and
go back to 9/11. It's
yeah.
like after 9/11, all right, now we have to take our shoes off, get
Sure.
on airplanes,
Absolutely.
and a lot more. You know, if we had done those measures beforehand,
right. And that brings up another point too, because when you're looking at this picture, there's a lot of different reactions, and there's a lot of different sets of eyes I can see, and there's a lot of different lenses you can be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
This as, you know, as a 13 or 14-year-old, wow, this is horrible. You know, you're thinking of a lot of things, how it affects the economy, though. And then the other thing too is that, you know, they're going to be other trained professionals going to look at this and go, okay, well, how can we learn from this? What can this tell us about building materials? So when it comes to looking at sources, you know, I go back to this, you know, the author of this book was looking at these sources to write a story about a kid who was escaping it. When you look at how people would look at a source such as this,
mm-hmm.
you know, a kid's gonna look at this and go, wow, this is horrible. You know, an engineer or safety professionals are gonna look at this and go, okay, what can these materials tell us, and how can we become better?
There's an old phrase, one man's trash is
It's
another man's treasure.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and you're right. You know, in looking at this, if I'm an engineer
right.
who lives in New York City,
sure.
I might want to move to Chicago now.
Right.
You know, they're going to need engineers. They're going to need construction workers. They're going to need carpenters and plumbers and eventual electricians. But yeah, they're going to need.
I mean, and here's the thing: when you're talking about different sets of eyes, well, looking at a primary source. I mean, these primary sources are not designed to make you miserable. We looked at how a primary source is used by an author, but the other thing is that I could sit there with my father-in-law, who's an engineer, and I'm fascinated by how buildings are put up because I want to know how to get out. I want to know how it affects planning and everything. I can look at it and talk about certain things, and he's going to go, "Oh, well, this is a I don't know, it's a flugel binder that we learned about in engineer school, whatever." And he'll tell me why it's put that way, and
the reason why it didn't fall in this
right.
particular instance because of what it's double reinforced with.
Right. So that's
flux capacitor or something like that.
Right. I mean, and those are the cool opportunities that these things kind of really present. The flux capacitor. Flugel binder, flux capacitor.
1.21 gigawatts.
They almost sound real.
All right.
Well, we're going to stop there while we're ahead. Thank you for watching.
Be good.